Well, it's about 3 minutes after 6:30, and I think we can get underway. One last time, I'm Bob Sack from the Lake Oswego Sustainability Network, and I'm going to be your host this evening. And we're looking forward to a very interesting evening. I want to start by just saying a few words about our organization. Uh, the Sustainability Network was organized in 2011 and by a group of citizens of our community to promote economically, ecologically, and socially healthy community. And we cover quite a broad range of topics in our efforts, and those are listed here. You can see economic vitality, education, energy, water, climate change, transportation, food, faithers. These are all sustainability topics that we try to pay some attention to. And we work through a group of teams and affiliations with partners to try to accomplish some action in these areas. So if you want to learn more about us, go to losn.org, our website, and perhaps sign up for our newsletter, and you can keep track of what we're up to. Tonight, we're going to start with a bit of an introduction on my part here, followed later by the presentation by our guest speaker, Ken Dragoon, who's Director of Hydrogen Development for Obsidian Renewables of Oregon. That happens to be a Lake Oswego company. And after his presentation, we will have some breakout rooms. That is, if you've done this before with Zoom, you know that what happens is that you are assigned to a smaller group of, say, 4 or 5 people, where you can have a chance to discuss with your friends and neighbors what you've heard and what questions you might have, and maybe what issues may have been coming to the forefront. And after we do that, we will report back to our more general meeting, and we're hoping that we will get some feedback from these breakout sessions from all of you. And then after that, we will open it up for a more general Q&A for everybody, including our speaker. So that's what we have coming up. But before we go any further, I'd just like to introduce our main topic here in a way. This is a hydrogen molecule. As you can see, it consists of a proton and an electron. It is by far the simplest molecule and the most prevalent in the universe. And it likes to connect to a lot of other molecules, particularly oxygen. And when it does, that becomes, as you know, H2O, or water. And it is the interaction between the formation of water and the disconnection of that formation to form molecular hydrogen that offers the opportunity to provide something that is of great interest in terms of fighting climate change. So as you know, global warming is the most biggest challenge of our generation. We've got to do away with fossil fuels as rapidly as possible. And hydrogen is potentially a perfect replacement for many of these uses of fossil fuels. You can burn it to generate heat without generating any carbon dioxide. The only byproduct is H2O, water. Or you can convert it into electricity using a fuel cell converter, which you'll probably hear more about from our speaker. So imagine a world where we heated our homes, powered our ships, airplanes, trucks, and trains, as well as our industries, with a green, environmentally friendly fuel that may someday cost less than we pay for fossil fuels. Could happen. So as I learned more about the prospects of hydrogen this past year, I decided, to the shock of my friends and family, to buy a hydrogen-powered car. These cars have electric motors, like a Tesla, but instead of a lithium-ion battery, they have a tank full of liquid hydrogen. and a fuel cell that converts the hydrogen into electricity to run the electric motors. They are best called hydrogen electric vehicles, or hydrogen EVs. These cars are available quite a bit in Japan and to some extent in Southern California, but they're rather pricey, and there are not many hydrogen filling stations, certainly not in our region, and the cost of hydrogen is still rather high. So I didn't buy this model, but rather I bought this one. This is my hydrogen powered car. As you can see, I get my electricity from a solar panel, which is connected to this little device here, which is called, as you'll learn more about it, an electrolyzer. And it's the magic machine that disconnects the hydrogen from the oxygen. And when that happens, it's stored here in these little vesicles. So here's the hydrogen, here's the oxygen. And so when I want to go for a ride, all I have to do is connect the wires between the what used to be the electrolyzer and is now the fuel cell, and I can drive around at least on my kitchen counter, and you can see it's rather cool. The hydrogen is actually powering this vehicle as well as turning on the lights, and I'm having a lot of fun, and it's quite a lot less expensive than the previous model that you saw. But anyway, I guess I show this partly because I just want to show off my little funny toy, but it's also to demonstrate that this is really technology that is, pretty far along. It's not like it's that magical that you can't even produce a nice little car. Anyway, so it needs to be scaled up, obviously. And so this is an example of a scaled up version of my vehicle. And someday, not before long, you may be getting your beer transported from Milwaukee in a vehicle like this. This is a hydrogen electric long haul truck, which runs on the same principle as my little toy car. That is, it has a tank full of hydrogen and a fuel cell that operates the motors. And although there's real questions about how much hydrogen would be better for smaller vehicles, there's quite a bit of evidence that when you get into bigger size vehicles like this, it's better than the lithium batteries, because you can refuel it very quickly. The batteries would take up a lot of room and weight in a vehicle like this, and whereas you can pack a lot of hydrogen in there for less. But I don't want to have you think that hydrogen is only good for vehicles. It really has many other uses in our society, and that's what we're going to be hearing about from our speaker shortly. So let me tell you a little bit more about Ken. Ken Dragoon has, and I'll get my notes out here to make sure I get it right, has been in the electric power industry for over 30 years. And he has been the founder of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. Sorry, and he founded that, and then 2 years ago, and that's a trade organization that promotes the use of hydrogen for a variety of uses, and connecting it to sources of renewable energy like wind and solar and hydro. And he, since January 1st, 2021, has been Director of Hydrogen Development for Obsidian Renewables, as I mentioned, which is headquartered right here in Lake Oswego. In a recent interview, Ken related that while obtaining his master's degree in physics, he held a special place in his heart for hydrogen, that little number one in the periodic table, and the simplest of all elements. And I'm going to quote what he said in this interview. My long-standing passion was never about hydrogen or the hydrogen economy. It's been to leave the planet better off than when I got here. So I've always looked for areas where I could use what talent I have to push ahead in support of this goal. Since climate change is the challenge of the time, and solar and wind power have become keys to addressing it, that's where I focused my attention. When I realized renewable hydrogen could play such an important role, that's when I became passionate about it. And when I saw the huge progress in Europe, virtually unknown among my US peers, the way seemed clear. And he went on, as I said, to found the Hydrogen Alliance in 2018, and has an association that advocates using renewable electricity to make climate neutral fuels. So without any further ado, I'd like to welcome Ken as our speaker for this evening, who will talk about using hydrogen in this new world of energy that we are now entering. Ken.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everyone, for spending your evening here with me and the rest of us on this topic that I do feel is quite important and actually, is deserving of your attention. Let me try to get my slides up on the screen here. There, I think you've got that. So as Bob said, I'm sort of still wearing two hats here. Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, the organization I founded in 2018. And I'll talk a little bit more about that. It's a trade association, nonprofit. And if you get nothing else out of this presentation, if you're interested in anything I'm talking about, go to the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance webpage, renewableh2.org. It's on the slide here in the lower left. There's a lot more information there, especially on the resources page. But as Bob mentioned, January 1st, I joined Obsidian Renewables with an office in Lake Oswego. With the virus, I haven't been there but once. I look forward to it. Just a little bit more about Renewable Hydrogen Alliance. As Bob said, it's a trade association dedicated to promoting the use of renewable electricity to produce climate neutral fuels. Hydrogen is one of them, but not the only one, in order to reduce dependence on fossil fuels. It's a growing and diverse membership. I left as executive director at the end of last year. We've been in the process of replacing me. My replacement's actually going to be announced tomorrow formally, and will take my place, we'll take her place on April 1st. And we're very, very excited about that. We'll take this organization to the next level. It has over 70 members, 9 electric and gas utilities, both electric and gas utilities. I think that's noteworthy. Both have interest in this. In Oregon, that includes the Eugene Water and Electric Board, Portland General Electric, and Northwest Natural. We have members who are electrolyzer manufacturers, as Bob mentioned, the device that actually creates hydrogen from water and electricity. Hydrogen vehicle manufacturers and all the parts that go into them are members. Project developers like Obsidian, which was a founding member actually, law firms, clean energy advocacy organizations, including the Northwest Energy Coalition, Renewable Northwest, if you're familiar with them, and CERT in California. We actually have our first tribal nation member, the Confederated Tribe of the Umatilla Indian Reservation. And we're looking forward to more of those and very proud of that. So just a word about Obsidian Renewables. It's the largest locally based developer of utility scale solar projects in the Northwest. And as I said, their office is in Lake Oswego. Look forward to commuting there soon. Obsidian is a pioneer of utility scale solar power in Eastern Oregon. The first utility scale projects came online in 2012. Obsidian is very proud of their commitment and connection with local communities, and generally have a lot of support in the communities they operate in. We operate in. the current project is a very large, will be the largest solar project in Oregon or Washington, a 400 megawatt, which is about a $500 million project in South Central Oregon. Very excited about that. We are also active in working with Northwest Renewable Energy Organizations and Oregon State Government to drive more solar and renewable energy investment generally. And now targeting being a pioneer in renewable hydrogen development, which witnessed my hiring there in January as Director of Hydrogen Development. So very exciting place to be, and very optimistic that we will make this work. So electrolyzers, kind of a long, ugly word, but it's the device that makes hydrogen from electricity. It sounds complicated, but actually it's not that complicated. It's something you can do in your kitchen with a 6 or a 9 volt battery. You take wires to each of the terminals of the battery and put it in a cup of water. Maybe a little baking soda will help. And what you'll find is bubbles coming up off of each of the wires in the cup of water. On the one, around one of the wires, it will be hydrogen, the other oxygen. So the H2O water is being split into hydrogen and oxygen, its constituent parts. This is a technology that was discovered in 1800, 2 centuries old. There's a newer version. Both of these are commercially available today. The proton exchange membrane, which was actually what is in Bob's little car there, which is kind of a more solid state version of the device, separates the electrodes by a plastic membrane instead of a cup of water. So it's a fairly simple process in principle anyway. As I said, it was discovered 200 years ago, but it's actually been utility scale technology for 100 years. These are 2 projects that were around in Norway, which is 90-something% hydropower, kind of like the Northwest, although we're more like 50%. They found themselves with extra hydropower, didn't know what to do with it, decided that they could make hydrogen. Why? Why make hydrogen? Well, hydrogen was discovered in the 19-teens, so you can take hydrogen and combine it with nitrogen out of the air to make ammonia. And so until the 19-teens, all fertilizer was really derived from manure products. And since 19-teens, it's been done with hydrogen combined with nitrogen to make ammonia. And that's what they were doing here. The company that does this in Norway still exists in some form. It's actually split into the electrolyzer manufacturer part and the fertilizer part. Nel Hydrogen and Yara, both Norwegian companies and still around. So why hydrogen? What do you do with the hydrogen? Well, you can make fertilizers, I mentioned. That's one thing. As Bob said, hydrogen can be used as a fuel directly. Hydrogen has no carbon in it, so when it's used as a fuel, either burned as a flame or used in a fuel cell, which I'll mention again in a moment what that means, it creates no carbon dioxide. So as a fuel, it's a lot better in that respect anyway than the carbon fossil-based fuels that we use today. So that's why there's a lot of excitement about it as a fuel. As many of you may know, there's been a lot of excitement about it for about 50 years. So good question is why now? And I'm going to answer that. It can be used as a fuel directly in these hydrogen cars, like the big version Bob showed and his little version. You can actually use hydrogen directly in natural gas pipelines in place of natural gas being a fossil fuel. When it burns, leaves a carbon footprint. Hydrogen does not. So it's a way of reducing the carbon footprint of natural gas systems. There are limits to how much you can do with that, but it's a pretty substantial amount given where we are today. Today, there is industrial hydrogen. As I mentioned, fertilizer comes from hydrogen and nitrogen. Virtually all of the hydrogen that's produced today comes from fossil fuels, most of it natural gas. You take natural gas and you combine it with steam in presence of a catalyst, and hydrogen gets stripped off of the methane in the natural gas, and that's where the industrial hydrogen comes from today. It leaves a big carbon footprint because when you take the hydrogen away, you're left with carbon and oxygen. It's actually carbon dioxide, and that's something that needs to be addressed. One of the things that you can do with hydrogen is you can combine it with carbon dioxide to form methane. Methane is the principal constituent of natural gas. And so there's really no limit to how much of that you can do. And this picture down here is of a project in Germany that was started in 2013. It's being operated, or it's owned by the Audi car company. It's a 6 megawatt project, which just means it's a utility scale project. It takes wind power, uses that to split water to make hydrogen. They situated themselves across the street from a biomass burning plant. They take the carbon dioxide effluent from that plant, combine it with the hydrogen to make methane that they're using in their compressed natural gas cars, and they call it e-gas. So that's a utility scale project that started in 2013. So this isn't a brand new thing. So fuel cells, we talked about electrolyzers. Electrolyzers take electricity and water and split the hydrogen out. Fuel cells put the oxygen and the hydrogen back together and make water and electricity. And that's what happens in these fuel cell electric vehicles. Those hydrogen vehicles really are electric vehicles. They're virtually indistinguishable. They have fewer batteries, but the drivetrain is the same. In place of some of the batteries, there's some hydrogen tanks, and this device, the fuel cell that Bob demonstrated in his little car, takes hydrogen in from one side, oxygen out of the air from the other, combines them across this plastic membrane, and generates electricity. Kind of like a battery. And a lot of people say, well, why bother with this? Batteries are more efficient. That's true. This device is about 50 or 60% efficient, which makes it about 2 to 2.5 times more efficient than a conventional car, but not as efficient as batteries. That's true. But it has some advantages. The fueling and range characteristics of these vehicles is very similar to conventional vehicles. In other words, they refuel in about the same amount of time, and they have about the same range, and they don't have the problems of noise and pollution. So very promising, especially for replacing heavy-duty diesel machinery engines. This is a map of where hydrogen is produced today in the United States from the National Renewable Energy Laboratory. It's 10 million tons of hydrogen produced a year in the United States. About 2/3 of that is used in the process of refining oil. Of course, we'd like to see that go down as we adopt electric cars. We won't need so much refined fossil fuels. About 1/5 of it, between 1/4 and 1/5 of it is for fertilizer production. And if we're talking about electrifying everything, this is one of the things we'll need to electrify, partly through conservation, partly through electrifying vehicles. But in the end, we're still going to need the fertilizer. We're still going to need some fuels. And this already is a $10 to $20 billion a year market. And if it's forced to decarbonize, that's what we're going to do. Is we will do it with, likely do it with this hydrogen from renewable electricity and electrolyzers. The cost of the devices has been dropping very fast. Over a period of 4 or 5 years, it dropped by a factor of 2. It's actually below that now. There was a recent announcement by one of the largest, the Norwegian company I was telling you about. They announced a week or so ago opening a new manufacturing facility, will probably double the world capability of producing those things, and they announced a 75% drop in their pricing in 2025 on account of it. You might ask, why are they doing this? This is a map of Europe. It's kind of a dated map. I'm sure the yellows have turned to greens, and there are more of them than are on this map. They stopped updating it, unfortunately, from my source. But there are all these projects getting developed in Europe, which is why the costs have dropped. It's all about economies of scale. We're not waiting for some new great technological breakthrough, though those will be coming. It's just about economies of scale. One manufacturer recently told me, hey, you know, Ken, we're mostly still making these things by hand. If we were making them at scale, we would print them. So it's this development. Why are they doing this? It's because of low cost wind and solar. It's really been a revolution in the cost of renewable electricity. Zero carbon wind and solar power are the lowest cost sources of electricity in much of the country and much of the world now. And although we focus a lot on what happens when there's not enough wind and sun to meet the demand for power, this is really a play on the other side of that. Even at relatively modest penetrations of renewable electricity, you get periods when it is windy and sunny, and you have the ability to produce more energy than there's demand for. And they saw this in Europe, where they're a bit ahead of us in renewable penetration, and just getting these wholesale markets flooded and wholesale prices going to zero, even sometimes negative, decided a better thing to do than throw the electricity away would be to build up these markets for it. So that's what happened. They started building these things and the costs started dropping. This is a chart showing the situation in Germany. Again, apologize, this hasn't been updated either. If you look at the bars on the right side of the graph, the last three bars are representing 2013, 2014, 2015. There's the installed amount of renewable electricity, wind and solar, in Germany. And between 2013 and 2015, there are those bars, it grew about 20%. The line there shows how much energy they had to throw away or curtail. You can see it was a pretty modest amount, but that 20% jump from 2013 to 2015 was a quadrupling of the energy they had to just throw away. And we're beginning to see this kind of thing here in the Northwest and in California and Texas and the Midwest, variously with both wind and solar. We do have to, we are turning it off at times, and the prices are at times negative. So we have this kind of economic convergence that's happening, where as we build out wind and solar, as at least the West Coast is certainly planning to do, we're going to have higher and higher penetrations of renewables. We're going to have these surpluses that we really ought to do something more useful than just throwing it away. One of the power managers told me he was tired of selling power at zero and would rather do something useful with it, especially locally. So he was very excited about the prospect of making a fuel locally, and they're planning to do it. So we have these increasing power surpluses as we build out the wind and solar systems, and as that happens, it provides more economic incentive to deploy more of these units, which causes economies of scale in the manufacture, and the costs of that are dropping. And so you have this sort of combination effect that, it's driving the cost of the product fuels down. And at some point, it's just going to be very competitive. And in fact, for some niches today, I would argue that it is competitive now. This is a huge economic opportunity, and a lot of organizations are realizing it. These are just two quotes that I grabbed kind of at the last minute. The top one is from Goldman Sachs. Green hydrogen looks poised to become a once-in-a-generation opportunity. We estimate it could give rise to a 10 trillion euro addressable market globally by 2050 for the utilities industry alone. So 10 trillion euros, more than $10 trillion. That says by 2050, that's a long time from now, but there are projects going in the billions of dollars now. And the second quote from a news organization in Asia, says a $36 billion project to mass produce hydrogen from renewable power sources is underway in Australia, fueling Canberra's hopes of turning clean energy exports into a major revenue generator as countries begin to shun coal. South Korea, Japan, China are all looking to fuel their countries with hydrogen or a hydrogen derivative. The Australia project is planning to make ammonia. I mentioned hydrogen vehicles. The 10 million tons a year are not going to hydrogen vehicles. There's a lot of talk about hydrogen vehicles, and it's very exciting, I will say, but it's a very small market today. We hope that it will grow. We expect that it will grow, and it's important because it's lots easier to compete with the energy cost of gasoline and diesel than it is with natural gas. So this is definitely a focus. The big win so far today is in hydrogen forklifts running around Amazon and Walmart and other warehouses, indoor warehouses where you can't use fossil fuels. A good percentage of those are actually retrofit from battery forklifts. Why would you go from a battery forklift to a hydrogen forklift? Hydrogen is more costly than the electricity. The battery vehicles are more efficient, but you've got so many forklifts off the floor charging for so many hours, you need a lot more of them than you do for the hydrogen units. And a lot of these originally battery operated forklifts have gone to hydrogen for that reason. There are about 8,800 light duty passenger vehicles. The Mirai is one of them. There are 3 or 4 manufacturers. Toyota, Honda, Hyundai are available in the US. California has about 43 fueling stations. They are targeting 200. They're in the midst of building them. There's new ones every month or so. There are 60 hydrogen transit buses. Yes, you can go and order a hydrogen bus and TriMet is looking at this. When I was at Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, I would tell people I don't really push hydrogen buses because I know the transit agencies are under a lot of pressure to do battery buses. And that's hard to buck. But the more experience they get with what battery buses can do and what they cannot do, they become more and more interested in hydrogen buses and they start contacting us. I've understood that at TriMet, some of the folks in the maintenance are very big on hydrogen, and it's for the same reason as the forklifts. You're just going to need somewhere between 1.3 and 2 times as many battery buses as you have diesel buses because of the range limitation and the refueling times. There are at least 2 manufacturers of heavy duty trucks, Nikola Motors. I think Bob had a photo of one of those. Kenworth and Toyota have teamed and they have a contract to deliver 10 of them to the port of Long Beach. Ports are very hungry for trucks, drayage vehicles and material handling vehicles that can run on hydrogen because again, batteries aren't able to be in service long enough for their purposes. And the ports are really significant sources of pollution that also tend to affect minority communities more. Poor neighborhoods tend to be situated around busy roadways and ports where there's a lot of diesel emissions. It's very unhealthy. So we're really looking forward to trading out the diesel engines for hydrogen. In fact, Cummins, Fortune 500 diesel engine manufacturer, just bought a company that produces both electrolyzers and fuel cells, and they're planning to offer a hydrogen drivetrain. There's a hydrogen ferry being built right now in Bellingham, Washington. It's for San Francisco, expects to be on the water this spring. San Bernardino, California ordered what will be the first hydrogen transit train in the US. It's got a lot of regulatory hoops to jump through, but there are hydrogen trains in Europe already on the rails. Zero Avia and at least one other company are building hydrogen aircraft that are actually flying, doing test flights now. They're looking at ranges of several hundred miles and 5-seater aircraft and plans for much more. So if there's a message other than going and looking at the Renewable Hydrogen website, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance website, I would leave you is this. There's a lot of talk about electrifying everything. I'm not sure that makes 100% sense, but what I'd like people to think about, part of electrifying everything means using renewable electricity to make fuels to be used in places where batteries can't reach very well or economically. And these are some examples. All of these photos here are photos of actual machines, hydrogen operated vehicles, with the exception of the ferry. That's an artist's rendition of the San Francisco ferry that's under construction. It doesn't look like that yet. Where do we go from here? Well, the key has been low-cost wind and solar. It's been a real energy revolution, and that's what's opened the door to this hydrogen economy idea that's languished for 50 years. You know, without a low-cost source of electricity, it takes a lot of electricity to make this hydrogen. And as anyone would point out, if you've got a bunch of renewable electricity, the best thing to do with it is to use it in place of fossil fuel generation power plants. And that's true, but what happens when all of those plants are shut off because there's such an abundance of renewable energy? And that's possible now because of the cost. In fact, it's a reality now. Every spring at noon in California, prices are 0 or negative at noon. Obsidian, to bring it back to us, Obsidian is looking at a number of potential hydrogen projects that would pair purpose-built solar with hydrogen production. Now, the solar only produces on average about 24% of the hours of the year, so you want to probably supplement that with some other purchases, but we think we can get the cost of solar down even further if you don't have to plug it into the electric grid, just plug it directly into the electrolyzer, so we can reduce the cost that way. We're looking at producing gas to go into gas turbines. It just isn't practical. We can get a couple of weeks when there's no wind in the wintertime, when there's very little sun. What are you going to do to replace the fossil units that we have today with batteries or pumped hydro? Will cost tens of times more probably than the renewables to get to 100%. So a lot of planners say you just can't get to 100%. Well, you can if you're willing to make synthetic fuels for those turbines to burn, which you can do. We're looking at building a hydrogen industrial park that will supply businesses and manufacturers with both renewable electricity and renewable hydrogen. That's a pretty exciting project that we're working on. We're getting actually contacted from other manufacturers of synthetic fuels that need hydrogen as a fuel stock, a feedstock, for making renewable diesel and synthetic aircraft fuel. And of course, we're looking at injection in the gas pipeline system because you can store an awful lot of energy there that's really prohibitively expensive to store in batteries or any other way. So this is sort of the end of the line for me here. Hydrogen is no longer the fuel of the future. That was the old joke. Hydrogen is the fuel of the future and always will be. That future is here now. This is, we had a symposium, our first year, Renewable Hydrogen Alliance did in May of 2019. We had 160 attendees. It was really exciting. You could hardly hear yourself think. There was so much talking going on. Folks from 10 states, 2 provinces in Canada and 3 European countries. We had this hydrogen bus come in from Ohio, which runs them. We're planning to have, with last year's symposium got canceled by the virus, but we're planning to do it again this middle of August. So that's my presentation. I wanted to give you an overview of what's going on. I think it's very exciting. I'm not the only one. We're getting approached by all kinds of investors interested in hydrogen infrastructure. So hopefully there are a lot of questions. This is kind of a complicated thing. There are all kinds of pathways for the hydrogen, so it's understandable if I left you with a lot of questions. Thanks.
I'm going to come back on here in a moment. If I can get this to work. The next part of the program, what a wonderful talk, Ken. I get so excited whenever I hear this. And the amazing thing is that it's so exciting, and yet so many people haven't really heard very much about it. So that's why this particular program is exciting for me. So the next part of the program is about a breakout. We'll have some small groups of 4 or 5 people, if we counted correctly, to give you all a chance to talk with your friends and neighbors about this presentation and whatever other ideas you might have about hydrogen. We really want these forums to be interactive and to involve our community in having interesting discussions and engaging in the topics that we're presenting. So that's why we're doing these breakouts. So I'm going to read, these are the questions that we've come up with that we hope will stimulate some discussion. And you're in your small group, you're not expected to handle all 5 of these, but we wanted to give you a few questions, and you could pick 1 or 2 maybe that you find particularly interesting and discuss them with your friends. So anyway, these questions, I'll read them quickly, and then they will be posted in the chat section of Zoom, so you can refer back to them in case you don't remember them, which I wouldn't expect you would. Anyway, but here are the questions. What were the most surprising parts of the presentation you just heard, if any? What would you like to understand better or know more about with respect to hydrogen and its role in meeting decarbonization targets? What concerns do you have regarding hydrogen's emerging role? What policies for promoting hydrogen or reducing carbon would you like to see enacted? Would you oppose mixing hydrogen with natural gas system because it might extend our dependence on fossil fuels? So at this point, Mary's going to try to break us up into smaller groups, and we'll be doing this for 15 minutes and coming back at about 7:30. And you'll get a little warning signal in your group when your time is about to expire. So Mary, let's break out.
Let's go.
Welcome back to the main room. The next part of our program is to, first of all, to get some reports. And I neglected to ask you all to nominate somebody from your small groups to be your reporter. So I'm going to have to hope that somebody from each group will be brave enough to take on that task, and ad-libbing is perfectly acceptable. No notes need have been taken. So maybe if there's somebody, gosh, do we have a smaller group? Have we had that many people drop out? It seems like a smaller on my gallery view anyway.
Yeah.
But
yes, we did. Yeah, I
Dropouts?
think after the presentation we had a bit of a drop off. So
okay, well, just to say that the whole idea of the breakouts and this is to try to make this an interactive kind of experience. So why don't we see Duca is raising his hand.
Well, we would like to have Ken talk about the flammability of hydrogen. There was some concern about that.
Okay.
Yeah, that came up in our group too. It's hard to be really definitive about that. Hydrogen has some properties that make it more flammable in some ways. It has a lower ignition energy, and I think it ignites in lower concentrations than some other gases, but it has a lot of positive attributes as well. So for example, if there's a leak outdoors, it's rising through the air quite quickly, trying to get away. There's a great film that shows 2 cars, similar cars, one gasoline and one hydrogen, and they induce a leak in each and ignite them. And the hydrogen vehicle, you know, the hydrogen is under 10,000 psi. So once the leak is detected, a valve opens up and it exhausts all the hydrogen in about 3 seconds, and it's just gone. If it's not in an enclosed space, of course. And it doesn't really catch fire because it's moving so fast. The gasoline pools under the car and completely demolishes the passenger compartment, whereas the hydrogen gets exhausted away from the passengers altogether. So, but you know, there are concerns about leaks in tunnels and parking garages. Need to have leak detection. The fueling stations have a lot of safety built in. It's pretty impressive, a lot of leak detection. I was listening to some people talk about leaks in fueling stations in California, which, you know, and at 10,000 PSI, you kind of figure that's a big deal. And the guy said, one of the guys said, was it enough to actually be flammable? And the other one said, oh no, these are tiny, tiny bubbles that escape, and they detect them at that level. So, you know, it's a flammable gas and it needs to be treated carefully. And there is a Center for Hydrogen Safety at Pacific Northwest National Laboratories that's there to teach people how to construct these plants and operate them safely.
So Ken, let me follow on with another practical application. You talked about that it could be stored in or put in natural gas pipelines. So I work in emergency preparedness, and I noticed that lots of people, when our lights were out a couple of weeks ago, or all of our electricity was out, a lot of people use their natural gas fireplaces to keep warm. And if we electrify everything, that would go away. Is this something that would be a practical application where you could use it to power a fireplace safely?
Yeah, potentially so. I mean, there's no reason you can't use hydrogen in place of natural gas. Has the advantage, of course, it's not making carbon monoxide, which can happen if the gas is natural gas or any other carbon gas isn't burned cleanly. But you know, it takes some adjustments, and you know, you'd have to probably have a tank at your house, and there might be safety concerns around that. But in principle, you could. And I share your concern. My brother lived in Central Oregon, and they had an outage, and they're 100% electric. And you know, it was 20 below zero or something, or 20, maybe it was 20 above zero. It was cold, and I worried for them, and I do worry about that. So hydrogen does have some resiliency benefits. We can make it here. All of our fossil fuels are imported from out of state right now. So being able to make fuel here from renewables that are generated here has some resiliency advantages too. There are backup power systems that run on hydrogen now. Microsoft recently ran a data center for 48 hours on hydrogen. Fuel cell towers often have hydrogen backup, just because you can store a lot more energy in a tank of hydrogen than you can in a battery.
What do you mean fuel cell towers? Or did you mean
Sorry,
cell
those
towers?
are different ideas. Cell phone towers
Okay.
that are fueled with hydrogen as a backup fuel.
How long do they last?
You can last days,
Okay, that's better than
maybe a week.
It's better than what we got right now.
Yeah. A lot of backup generation is done with diesel. Typically, they don't have more than 2 days on hand. And it has air quality issues that the hydrogen doesn't.
Ken, another issue that came up was energy or hydrogen storage, which sounds very attractive. Walt was mentioning that it not only has to be stored very high pressure, but that there may be metals you can use to create a hydride that require less pressure for the storage issue. Can you speak about any of that?
Yeah, it's one of the things about hydrogen. There are just so many paths you can look down. You don't have to store hydrogen at high pressure. The problem with hydrogen, it's a very light gas. It has a lot of energy per kilogram, but it's a very diffuse gas. So there's not a lot of energy per cubic meter or cubic foot. So you either have to get a whole bunch of it in one spot, like for a car, you either have to put it under high pressure or you have to liquefy it. And there is this other technology called metal hydrides that can store it as well. And they all have, they all have their benefits and costs and issues. The metal hydrides haven't quite become commercial yet. I'm not totally sure why. We've looked into some of them because they sound really good. Typically, it takes a bunch of energy to get the hydrogen back out when you want it. So that's an issue. But to liquefy hydrogen takes a lot of energy. Compress the hydrogen takes a lot of energy. I think the best solution, the cheapest solution really is to put it in the gas pipeline system if you can.
Well, those
Ken,
are our
I've
questions.
read about.
So Ken,
Well, I'm
go
sorry,
ahead,
Dorothy,
Bob.
go ahead. Well, I was just going to say about storage. I was reading about this facility in Utah where they're talking about storing it in caverns where it doesn't really have to be compressed, but there'll just be a lot of room down there to store a lot of hydrogen. They can compress it when they need it to use it. Is that something you've commented on?
Yeah, that's a very exciting project. The story behind that is the very large coal plant in Utah that was actually feeding Los Angeles. And they decided they would decommission the coal plant, and LA Department of Water and Power wanted to replace the plant with a gas plant, and it wasn't very popular. So they decided that they would do a project where they are going to build a gas plant, but they're going to co-fire it 30% hydrogen. The hydrogen, this coal plant, just by happenstance, happens to sit on top of a geological salt dome formation. So those can be hollowed out. This is not a new technology, but you can hollow them out and store gases in there. And so they're planning to store hydrogen in there. That one project will store 150 times as much energy as all the batteries in the US combined. That's how much difference there is in the capability of storing energy in fuels as in batteries.
Wow.
At a very much lower cost, like about 1 to 5% the cost of batteries. It's a very exciting project. Mitsubishi Hitachi Power Systems got the contract for that, and they are members of the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance.
The question I had, Ken, was around, you gave a couple examples of forklifts and transit facilities, transit organizations choosing to use hydrogen versus batteries because of the time to recharge and the range. And my understanding from the battery people is that battery technology is also moving very, very fast, and recharging times should shorten, and battery and range should increase. So I'm wondering, is that going to affect the viability of hydrogen, or how does that all look like?
Well, batteries have a long way to go to get to where they need to be for some of these applications. I just don't think that's going to happen in a timely enough way to do it. For heavy duty trucks, transport, well, for anything that needs to be in use a lot. So one of the things about batteries is the faster you recharge them, the more power it takes to do that. So it's actually a bigger strain on the power system the faster you charge them.
Mm-hmm.
One of the advantages of hydrogen is the electricity can be delivered when it's available, as opposed to when you need to recharge the vehicle. So you can actually put lower cost electricity into the hydrogen vehicle to begin with. So, you know, there's something to what you say, batteries are getting better, but for some applications, for aircraft, for example, it just isn't really feasible. They just weigh too much to send an airplane very far at all. Similarly for ships, there are some like school buses, I think, are a great application for battery buses because they have time to recharge. Ferries, there are some in Norway, there are some battery ferries, and where you're going a relatively short distance and have a place to recharge. But for ocean going vessels, it's not going to be batteries. It just can't be. For trains, no.
Excuse me, I didn't mean to interrupt you. Is this technology being considered for use in commercial flying? You know?
Oh, yes.
Yeah?
Yeah, Airbus, Boeing hasn't gotten there yet. They are skeptical, but Airbus announced they plan by 2035 timeframe to have commercial jet aircraft or commercial aircraft. They may not be jets based on hydrogen. That's very exciting. Yeah, if you Google hydrogen and Airbus, you'll see their designs. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, I wanted to point out that we already pipe natural gas into almost all our homes. So it seems like using that infrastructure for hydrogen should be possible. But what are the differences between natural gas and hydrogen that you would have to consider to try and use the same infrastructure?
Yeah, so they at low percentages, like 5% by volume, pretty much everyone who's looked into it can't see any issue with it. Up to about 20%, I think the UK has a distribution system running on 20% hydrogen, or starting to. Beyond that, there are concerns, one being, well, up to 20% hydrogen, you wouldn't notice any difference at your water heater or your stove or whatever appliance you're running on hydrogen. Actually, gas turbines for producing power, they all say they can go to 30% without any retrofits at all. Beyond that, you need some changes to the burner tips. Hydrogen has a lower energy content per cubic foot than natural gas. So you need a higher volume to get the same amount of energy out of it. It flows a little more readily, so it tends to come out faster too. So that at high pressures and concentrations, it tends to embrittle steel. So cracking of pipelines can be an issue. Northwest Natural has lined all their pipes with some sort of plastic, so they're not concerned about that. And then you have compressors and valves and all kinds of other things that the gas company likes to worry about. So there's that. We talked Obsidian. We talked with Williams Pipeline, an interstate pipeline company, about injecting hydrogen into their system. They're very interested in doing that. They haven't done it yet. You know, there's a lot of concern about any kind of change.
Do they put them in at the same time? They mix them together like
Yes,
you do with ethanol?
Yeah,
Really?
we would mix them.
And
We would mix them.
the pressurization isn't different for the two kinds of gas?
No, you just have to inject it at the same pressure, a little bit higher to make it move in. Yeah, I'm not that familiar with the actual technology, but it exists and they are doing it in Europe. Pretty.
And maybe you could comment on some of the hydrogen production developments around the Northwest. You know, the dam up in Washington and a few other.
Yeah.
Virginia.
So the legislation I mentioned, I didn't mention to you, I guess, we passed some legislation in the state of Washington. We supported legislation that passed in Washington to allow public utility districts to make and sell renewable hydrogen. So hydrogen from renewable electricity. That passed through the legislature without a dissenting vote. I'm very proud of that. And the Douglas County PUD in central Washington, in East Wenatchee, They own a very large dam, 300 megawatt Wells Dam on the Columbia, and they're going to use their hydropower to make hydrogen. So they have a very exciting business model from my point of view. So these utilities that own power plants, if you have a, say, 100 megawatt power plant, you can't sell all 100 megawatts, or you can't depend on all 100 megawatts to serve your load. You have to hold a few megawatts back, something like 6%. You can't sell. You have to have that. So if you have 100 megawatts, you can use 94, and the last 6 you have to hold in reserve in case there's some problem on the system. So you can rapidly ramp up power generation to avoid, system outages. Well, equivalently, if you have a load that's operating at 6 megawatts, you could interrupt that. You could turn that off when there's a system disturbance, and that frees up your hydro or your power plant to use all of it. And that's what they're planning to do. They bought a 5 megawatt, which is $7-8 million project, hydrogen project. And they believe that a significant part of that investment will be recouped by the value they get from freeing up their dam to produce more power. So that's very exciting. So that's happening. Eugene Water and Electric Board and Northwest Natural have announced a partnership with the Bonneville Environmental Foundation to do a hydrogen project in the Eugene area. We're very excited about that. We also, Bonneville Environmental Foundation, Douglas PUD, and Toyota and Renewable Hydrogen Alliance teamed up to get a grant to build the first hydrogen fueling station in Washington State. Will be on the I-5 corridor, somewhere probably between Chehalis and Olympia. There's work on getting more money for more stations in Washington. There's a bunch of talk. I think I mentioned TriMet has been interested in hydrogen buses increasingly. As I said, the more they learn about battery buses, the more interested in hydrogen they get. So they've been talking with Toyota about a Portland fueling station. And at Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, we have a transportation committee. We're trying to put together a critical mass of fleet owners willing to take on some hydrogen cars to justify building a fueling station. The fueling stations cost somewhere in the neighborhood of $1.5 million. They can service a lot more vehicles than the cheaper electric charging stations, just because the refueling happens a lot more quickly. So you get more vehicles through per hour. But you need to have enough vehicles to use it in order for it to be cost effective. So we've been working on cracking that nut. Sort of exciting if we can do it in conjunction with TriMet. If they're doing a bus fueling station and we can do a passenger vehicle fueling station next door, that might be a way forward. And those talks are going on now. I wish they were further along. There's one hydrogen car registered in the state of Oregon. It's parked out at PDX and it's refueled in California.
Whoa.
Have to ship
So
it to
Ken,
California to refuel it.
Are there
Well,
any
listen,
fleet, state or city that have hydrogen fleets, or any, maybe
Oh,
not in
yeah.
the US, anywhere? Yeah.
Yeah, well, California. Yeah,
Okay.
California, and there's some in the Northeast somewhere. British Vancouver and Victoria have some hydrogen fueling stations, but there's nothing in Oregon, Washington, Idaho. Colorado has an active group promoting hydrogen, and they're working on putting in a kind of a pilot fueling station, a sort of a more of a demonstration than a real fueling station.
Well, I think we're getting close to running out of time. Is there any way to do this virtually? It's a wonderful talk, Ken, and it's so exciting. I wanted to just alert people that 1 month from now, we're going to have, let me get my share screen back here for just a minute. we're going to have this, the online forum will be The Soil Will Save Us. Kristen Olson.
Generative
and
agriculture.
I think Stephanie has maybe left. Otherwise, Stephanie, are you around? And would you-
Yeah, I'm here. I'm
okay.
sorry.
Oh, that's right. Can
Yeah.
you have a word about this?
Sure. Yeah. So Kristen Olson wrote this wonderful book, The Soil Will Save Us. And it's about soil, how important soils, healthy soils are for sequestering carbon. And it's a delightful book, and she has a lot to say about different things, particularly around regenerative agriculture and how we think about our soils and how our soils function. So I encourage everybody to join us. And then this is kind of a kickoff for an Earth Month and in April that the Watershed Council, the Oswego Lake Watershed Council, is actually going to be putting together a thing where we're looking at soils and ending the month with handing out tidy whities for everybody to invite people to be part of the actually bearing a piece of 100% cotton underwear to actually do some assessment on how healthy our soils are. So I invite everybody to join us in April and start thinking about how our soils are a part of our climate solution.
Thank you, Stephanie. And maybe just one last little bit of information. We have been recording this and will be available on our website before long, after it's gotten a little editing. So if you know of a friend or somebody who wasn't able to make it to the forum, you could tell them, give them that link. So I think that's it. Anybody else want to say anything before we wind up?
Well, I'd like to thank you for inviting me, and thank you for having this great forum. I think it's a real public service and we need more of it. I really appreciate being invited and having a chance to talk to you all. Thanks.
Thanks a lot, Ken.
Yeah,
Really
thank
Yes,
you.
thank you. Very
My
good.
pleasure.
Thank you.
All right.
so much.
Well, Mary, you're welcome to, I guess.
Okay.
And take the lights out.
All right. Well, thank you all for joining. We'll see you next month.